says, so here's what I want you to do, God helping you take your everyday, ordinary life, you're sleeping, you're eating, you're going to work and walking around life, and place it before God as an offering. Embracing what God does for you is the best thing you can do for Him. Don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without even thinking. Instead, fix your attention on God. You'll be changed from the inside out. That's really what it's about, isn't it? Really recognize what He wants from you and then quickly respond to it. Unlike the culture around you, always dragging you down to its level of immaturity. God brings the best out of you, develops well-informed maturity in you. I love that. I love that. I want to tell you a little bit this morning about a young man by the name of Walter Carr. Walter, as a college student, he goes to school in Birmingham, Alabama, and he's in college, and he gets his first job. And his first job starts the next morning, but something happens to Walter. His car breaks down, like he can't. It's not working, and so he makes several calls and calls some friends, and no one is able to help him. The problem is he starts his first job the next morning working for a moving company, and his first job is 20 miles away from his house, from his apartment, helping a family move. And so Walter strikes out every time he calls someone, his friends and classmates. He's desperate to get to his first job, doesn't want to be late, doesn't want to not show up on the first day, and he's unable to do so. And so Walter goes online, and he looks up Google Maps, and he calculates the 20-mile distance based on the best route to take and how long it would take if you set out on foot and started to walk. 20 miles. And so he calculated, according to Google Maps, that it would take someone on foot 8 hours to walk the 20 miles. Because he was a former high school cross-country runner, he calculated that he could probably shave off a couple hours off that hike. And so he set his alarm for midnight, and at midnight he set out to his first job. He gets about 4.5 hours in, and he says later that whenever his legs started to burn and his feet started to hurt, that he would just focus on the goals that were ahead of him, and he would continue to repeat, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. About 4:30 that morning, he sits down in an empty parking lot to rest his hurting feet. And it was about then that a local policeman pulled up and noticed him sitting out there and asked him if he was okay. Walter kind of shared his story and what he was trying to do and where he started out from, and it moved the officer so much that he asked him if he had anything to eat or drink, and he said, I had some eggs, just before midnight, but I don't have any cash on me, I don't have any money to get anything, and the officer told him to get in the car, and he took him to get him some breakfast, get him something to drink, and then the officer drove him 4 miles closer to his destination. I'm painting a picture for you this morning. Took him 4 miles closer to his destination. He said, I can't take you any further. I got to do a shift change. And he dropped him off in a church parking lot. He says, it's a little bit safer here. He said, if you'll stick around for a while, I'll try to get someone else to drive you. And Walter waited, and after about a half hour, he couldn't take the risk, and so he set out again. Later that morning, a little while later, he was walking down a 2-lane highway when another officer spotted him and had heard his story over the dispatch line. And he picked him up and he drove Walter the rest of the way to his destination. He arrived at the homeowner's house about 6:30 that morning, and the officer walked up to the door and said to the homeowner, I have a very nice young man in my car, told him the story, and the family was so moved that they said, they offered Walter a bed upstairs and a chance to rest and some breakfast and his response was, I'd rather just get started working. And so he helped the family move all day long and got them settled into their new home. And here's what I want you to see this morning, is that his determination and his uncommon diligence. What is exceptional? Exceptional, if you'll remember, is unusual, uncommon, and out of the ordinary. Unusual, uncommon, and out of the ordinary. The homeowner was so moved by Walter's uncommon, out of the ordinary, and unusual commitment and determination that they posted his story on Facebook, and it quickly went viral. So much so that they started a GoFundMe page with the goal to raise $5,000 for Walter to get a new car, a used new car. And I just checked this last week, I think on July 18th, and Walter's GoFundMe page was already up to more than $62,000. In addition to that, Walter's new boss for the new company that he started working at heard the story and interacted with Walter. I want you to see the clip of this. Watch this.
Finally tonight here, America Strong, a young man working, going to school. He wants to be a Marine one day. And just listen to what happened to him on the night before his first job.
Walter Carr of Homewood, Alabama, was getting ready to start his first day on the job, his first job. But the night before he started with that moving company, his car broke down. So Walter started walking 20 miles to get there, starting at midnight. And he made it to the home he was supposed to pack up, the Lamy family of Pelham, Alabama. It was 2 days later, his boss at Bellhop Moving walked Walter over to a group of cars. One of those cars was about to be his.
This is my car. I'd like it to be your car. I really think that, it's in much better hands with you than it is with me. I couldn't think of a better way to part ways with this and put it to better use. Serious. Yeah.
Walter says he hopes his story helps others. And right there, the family at the home he walked to all night long to help move.
You've changed all of our lives. Walter, you have no idea how many lives you've changed and inspired. You have no idea.
Walter tonight on his way with help from the family he moved and from the boss he moved with his determination.
Walter, an example for us all.
Wow. Now, how many of you know the normal thing would have been for Walter to throw up his hands and say, I guess that's just my lot in life. I guess this is just, I never can catch a break. This is just who I am. This is just where I come from. And I guess this is just something I'm going to have to get used to. So why even bother trying? Walter could have also been bitter towards the people who didn't offer him a ride that day. There was a lot of things going on. But if Walter had done that, how many of you know he wouldn't be $62,000 richer, and he wouldn't have a new car, and he wouldn't have the admiration of his new boss? I'm telling you, there's something that happens in a life of a person who possesses a spirit of excellence, something that is exceptional, uncommon, unusual, and out of the ordinary. In preparing for this series, I began to think back about what motivated me to get into ministry to begin with. I was just a teenager. And in that time as a young teenager, around 14, 15 years old, I began to think about the ministry that God would be calling me into. And it's interesting, when I tell this to people, they kind of get surprised to hear that my launch into ministry really began as an irritation. Kind of like a bother. But how many know sometimes God will take something that's an irritation and use it to propel you to your purpose? Talk to me, somebody. And so I began to look around. I remember kind of looking around at a lot of the people that I was going to church with, and the people who I was going to school with. I was in a Christian school, and I began to notice that so many of these people lived very average, very normal lives. And consequently, the results that they were getting in life was very average. They weren't experiencing victory. They were always experiencing defeat. The struggles, it wasn't just struggles that they were pushing through. They were giving in to a lot of their struggles. They were giving in a lot of the compromise that the world had thrown at them. And I began to look at that and think that that's not right. And so I guess what motivated me and propelled me into ministry started out as a bother, as an irritation. And I thought, if I'm going to launch into ministry, I'm going to do it upon the platform that whatever it is that God uses me to do, it is going to be to help people live successful Christian lives. And so I've been doing that for 30 plus years, almost 40 years, helping people live successful Christian lives. You know, last week we talked about two different roads that Jesus talked about at the end of his Sermon on the Mount. He talked about one road that is very wide and very broad, and he says the majority, the normal group, travel on this road. And then he says there's a different road. He says that's much narrower, and few people travel on that road. And then he goes on to tell us, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction. But small is the gate and narrow is the road that leads to life. How many this morning say to yourself, I want to be on the narrow road that leads to life? I want to be on the different road that Jesus talked about. In fact, touch two people and three people and say this like this. Say, you look different. You look different. Tell them you really, really look different. Tell them that. Tell them. Speaking of looking different, don't take this off my preaching time this morning, but I'm reminded of that family who went to New York City for the very first time. It was their really first time actually going any further than like 20, 30 miles outside their little country town. And they showed up at New York City, and their eyes were just wide open. They looked at all the big skyscrapers, and they went into this big, tall building, this big skyscraper, and they walked around, and they were just in awe. And they came up to these two doors. And on the side of these two doors, there was all these buttons. And they didn't know what it was. They just stood there, the father and the son just kind of stood there like two mules looking at a new gate. And they didn't know what it was. And all of a sudden, the two doors opened up. And this elderly, kind of out-of-shape woman walked into this little room. And she turned around and faced them, and the doors closed. A few moments later, the doors opened back up, and a young, beautiful supermodel walked out. And the young man looked up at his dad and said, "Dad, what is this thing?" And his father said, "I don't know, son, but go get your mother." I'm just saying this morning that you look different. You ought to look different. You ought to look really, really different today. Amen. We've been highlighting different people in the scriptures who possess an exceptional spirit about them, an excellent spirit. We looked at the early life of King David and how, you know, when thousands of people took a step backwards because they saw the obstacle named Goliath, David took a step forward all alone because he saw the opportunity called Goliath. Then last week we looked at the Apostle Peter and how he was an exceptional life. And we looked at some of the scriptures in the epistles that he had written to the early church about living excellently, living with an exceptional life. And today we're going to jump all the way back to the OT, that's Old Testament, and we're going to look at another young man by the name of Daniel. Daniel was a young boy when he was taken into captivity by King Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians. And the environment and the culture that Daniel was thrust into as a young boy was full of idol worship. It was a pagan culture. It was filled with, like just worldly ideologies and philosophies. Daniel found himself living in and surrounded by this pagan, anti-God culture. And you think to yourself, well, that's Daniel, and that's Old Testament, and he was in a culture where they worshipped idols, but I got to tell you, it's kind of like that today, isn't it? I mean, we may not live in a culture where it's common for people to worship bronze statues or graven images, but we worship our idols. It's called American Idol. It's called the Academy Awards. I watched that a couple years ago, and I only got about halfway through because I didn't have enough Dramamine in my house. It's called any sports championship parade. Have I touched you yet? Have I found you? Right? Because if not, give me some more time, and I'll find your idol this morning. I'll come right to your seat and find what your idol is today. Anyway, so Daniel, what I'm saying is everything around him was so different than who God was calling him to be. And even though Daniel was surrounded by and living in this culture that was contrary to the values and the faith that God had established and ordained in his life, Daniel knew the importance of standing up and being counted for God in a dark culture. He knew the importance of not fitting in, but standing out in a dark world. I'm in Daniel chapter 5 this morning, beginning in verse number 12. I believe we have it up there on the screen. Listen to this. It says, because an excellent spirit, someone say excellent spirit. Because an excellent spirit, knowledge and understanding to interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve problems were found in this Daniel. You might say, well, Pastor Doug, I don't know how to interpret dreams. But guess what? God has given you some gifts and talents. And then you look at the other traits here, the other little bullet points here: knowledge, excellent spirit, understanding, being able to gain and solve problems. Hey, this is something that God has given every one of us the ability to do, to be an influence in our culture. Amen. Daniel was just one of many people who were in a really bad situation. He was just one of many who were thrust into an adverse culture. But he stood out because of his excellent spirit. And watch this, as a result, God continued to give him wisdom and influence. Wisdom and influence. Now here's kind of the gist of what's going on. Daniel's this young Jewish boy. He's plucked out of his homeland. He's put into Babylonian culture and world. He's surrounded by things that are contrary to his faith and his values. And there's these guys in the kingdom. Let's call them wise guys. They're magicians. They're sorcerers. They're these guys that were like counselors for the king, influential people, but they had the ability to be like these wise counselors, or people who would give the king advice, advisors, I guess you'd call them. And so the king was having nightmares, right? Too much chicken at night. And so he's laying in bed, he's having these nightmares, he's having these bad dreams, and these reoccurring dreams keep showing up, and he can't understand what they're all about. They're driving him crazy, right? So the king says, I need you to get these wise guys over here in front of me, and I want them to interpret my dream. And so these wise guys show up, and the king says, I'm going to tell you what, you interpret this dream, and you tell me what's going on in these dreams, and I will reward you beyond your wildest imagination. I'll lavish you with royal gifts. You'll be set for the rest of your life. But here's the caveat. If you don't interpret the dream, you're going to die. That's a nice king, isn't it? No pressure, right? And so the wise guys said, tell us the dream, and we will interpret. And the king went, No. See, I want to make sure you're the real deal and you're not a bunch of phonies. So here's what's going to happen. You are going to tell me what I dreamed, and then you're going to interpret it. And if you don't, you're going to die. But if you do, you get rewarded. And they said, but O king, no human can do what you're asking us to do. Only God can do it. Only a God can do that. Right? And the king says, well, give it a try. And so they couldn't do it. And so the king ordered all the wise guys in the kingdom to die, to be executed. And while all this is going on, that night, God gives Daniel a vision for what the king dreamt. And not only what he dreamt, but what it meant. And so Daniel reports this to his captain, the one who's over him. Remember, he's in captivity. And he tells him, I know how to interpret. You don't have to kill all these guys. You don't have to kill them. I can interpret the dream. Now, how many know only someone who has an excellent spirit, who has confidence in God, is willing to put their neck out like that? And so They bring Daniel to the king, and Daniel interprets the king, his dream. He tells him what it was. He interprets it for him. And for the sake of time this morning, we don't need to go into it. There's a whole thing on what he dreamt, and that's a message and a study on it. It's an amazing thing. You can look it up in chapter 2 and chapter 3 of Daniel. But I'm telling you, it's the king was so moved and so impressed that he promoted Daniel. He promoted Daniel. Okay, so here's where we're at. Okay, Daniel chapter 6, beginning in verse number 3. It says, "Now Daniel so distinguished himself amongst the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities." Now here's what's happening. Now Daniel, God continues to promote him. He's using his influence to make a difference, to make an impact. How many know if you'll let your light shine before others, that God will cause your light to, how many are your salt and light in the earth? And so God will use your influence, and he'll continue to promote your influence. And this is what's happening. Daniel continues to have his influence be promoted and elevated. And it says, so Daniel so distinguished himself amongst the administrators and the satraps. What is that? Those are just these like government, local officials. It could be, we could say, with the mayor of Norco. And he so distinguished himself amongst the mayor of Norco. By what? By his exceptional qualities. Someone say exceptional qualities. What was it by? It was by his exceptional, not by the way he fit in, not by the way he knew how to party and smoke reefer with everybody else, not by the way he, was able to promote himself. Come on, somebody, talk to me. It was because of his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. Now let's bullet point some of the characteristics of Daniel. Daniel's spirit of excellence, number one, is what made him exceptional. His spirit of excellence is what made him exceptional. Daniel could have been bitter. Well, I tell you what, they took me from my homeland. Look at everything they're doing. I'm not going to give them anything. I'm not going to work harder. I'm not going to shine. I'm just going to do the minimum because of what they've done to me. Do you know what they've done to me? Do you know that could have been on every part of his his conversation could have been all about what had happened to him, his past, what they did to him. You know anybody like that? You know anybody where their entire conversation is about what happened to them? He could have been bitter. Daniel could have been indifferent. Daniel could have spent all of his energy condemning and criticizing the people he disagreed with. Daniel could have adapted. He could have thrown up his hands. He could have said, well, if you can't beat them, join them. I guess, if I'm going to survive this thing out, if I'm going to make it through this thing, I might as well adapt, hang below the radar. Come on, you know anybody like that? You know anybody who just kind of hangs out below the radar, just kind of going through the motions of Christianity? Daniel could have adapted. These are things that normal people, average people, would have done. But I want to say it again today. God did not call you to be average. He called you to stand out. God did not call you to fit in. He called you to be different. If Walter Carr would have been like most other people, he would be $62,000 poorer today and not have wheels to get to his car. I'm just saying this morning that your blessing, come on somebody, your blessing is not tied to mediocrity. Your blessing and your influence is tied to a spirit of excellence. Amen. How many of you would agree that we live in a culture where mediocrity is the norm? So it kind of looks like this. On that job, if most of the people are working at a high standard, then the fit-in person will be under pressure to perform at that high standard. But if the majority of the people are performing at a low standard, then the fit-in person will match that low standard. Come on, I want to say it again this morning. God did not call us to fit in. He called us to stand out. When other people are giving their minimum, God says it's time for you, as my kids, to give your maximum. Amen. Paul said it like this in Colossians chapter 3. Whatever you do, work at it with all of your heart as working for the Lord. In other words, it's not what we just do here at church that counts for the Lord. It's what we do, whatever we do, wherever we do it, as if God was the one hiring us. You know, several years ago, I was out taking out the trash, and it was in the middle of a windstorm. And the wind would blow through that canyon right up there, and I was putting out this last trash can, and the wind took the can and turned it over, and all the trash went out there all over the road, and it was just like shrapnel. You know what I'm talking about? It was just like it blew in every direction. I quickly hurried. I gathered up all the pieces of paper, got them put back in the can, put the lid on, and I noticed that there was one more piece of paper about 20 feet away just hanging out there. And I thought, okay, so I went after it. And just as I got down to pick up that piece of paper, the wind picked it up and took it another 20 feet. And I thought, oh, man. And I got to it, and I bent down to pick it up, and guess what? It took it another 15, 20 feet. This happened 2 or 3 times, and I got to make a confession to you this morning. I looked at that piece of paper and I thought to myself, well, it's not like I didn't try. I mean, really, it's not my fault the wind is blowing. And I started to just let it go. Don't you all look at me so holy this morning. I will go into a prophetic zone and I will walk up to you and I will point out your compromises in front of the entire church. So don't let y'all look at me so holy this morning. So I started to let it go, and then all of a sudden it was like I heard the Spirit of the Lord say, get it. Get it. And I just took a deep breath and I went after it. And I chased that piece of paper all the way up the street, all the way to the end of the block, and I got that piece of paper and I marched it all the way back, stuck it in that can, and when I put the lid on, I heard a voice from my neighbor who happens to also know that I'm a pastor. And all she said was, I was watching you to see if you were going to get it. And I thought, thank you, Jesus, that I obeyed the voice of the Lord. We used to every year as a family, Taffy and I and the girls, would go to Anaheim every year for what we call the Believers Convention. I don't need to get into what all that's about. Some of you have been there, but this would take place the entire week, and it would start out on Monday morning. The first service would start about 9 a.m. They'd have 2 services, 2 sessions of teaching, and then they would break for lunch, and they would have an afternoon session after lunch, 1 or 2, and then they would have an evening session. And this would go on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, and then Saturday. And so we were just drenched into the Word of God for the entire week. And so we didn't want to have to stress with the commute. We would just, every year we would get the room there at the convention center. Now I got to tell you something. Is Virginia Verdone around here? Because I got a beef with Marriott. I don't know why they give you these little tiny trash cans in your room. Just a little tiny thing, enough to fit like a water bottle and a piece of paper. How many know what I'm talking about? And they put that thing in your room. But you know, by the end of the day, every day, that thing is full and overflowing. Like you got the water bottle in there, and now you got 3 more water bottles in there, and you got other trash. And boy, I tell you, some days that thing was just spilled out all over the floor, because, that's just, especially if you're eating lunch in your room or having dinner in your room, it just fills up, And this one particular day, it was before the evening session, and that room, that room, that trash can was so full and overflowing We had papers flowing out on the floor. We had water bottles flowing out on the floor. There was even a pizza box that was hanging up there on the side. Sorry, I haven't been eating bread lately, and I said pizza, and my heart kind of fluttered there for a minute. Sorry about that. In fact, everybody, can you close your eyes and bow your heads here? Father, I just want to thank you for Round Table. God, and those fine folks down there, we're talking about the spirit of excellence, how they made the first honest pizza. I just want to thank you, God. We appreciate you for that. Anyway, so that thing was just kind of overflowing, right? And so we got to the meeting that night. I remember tapping and looking at that thing. Look at that trash over there in the room. You know, it got to the point where I would just take the trash and throw it from a distance. You know, oh, nope, 5 feet away. It's close enough. And we got to the meeting that night, and Brother Copeland was ministering on the spirit of excellence. And he said, remember that? And he said in front of that entire convention hall, he said, now some of y'all are staying hold on a second. Some of y'all are staying in the hotel here. And he said, they got that little trash can in your room. And he said, some of y'all, you got so much trash laying all over the floor. And he said, she has to come in after you after she's been working all day and her feet hurt, and maybe she's working 2 jobs and she's got to bend over and pick up your trash too. What if that was your mama? And he pointed up, as God is my witness, he pointed up to the balcony where we were sitting. Like he pointed at us and he said, some of you, after this service is over, you need to make a beeline back to your room and clean up your trash. Right? And so service was over. We didn't go anywhere. We hustled back to our room. We cleaned up all that trash. Wow. Well, Pastor Doug, that's what those employees are paid to do. Now, I want to tell you again, what you do, you don't do unto those employees. You do it unto God. Amen. You are people who are exceptional. You have a spirit of excellence on you. You get up to the checkout counter and you realize that ketchup bottle that you put in your cart, you decide you already got one at home. You don't just walk over there and stick it over there by the Frosted Flakes because you don't want to walk back to the other side of the store. No, a person of excellence will walk it back where the ketchup goes. Well, that's what those employees are. You don't do it to those employees. You do it unto God. Why? Because you are people with excellence. You have an excellent spirit. You are not normal. You are unusual. You are uncommon. You are out of the ordinary. Am I talking to anybody today? If you're taking notes this morning, write this down. The spirit of excellence comes from within, and every follower of Christ has access to it. Let me say it again. The spirit of excellence comes from within, and every follower of Christ has access to it. Now, here's what I want to say this morning. Methods of excellence can be taught, but a spirit of excellence is something that is caught. I'm not talking this morning about outward behavior modification. I'm talking about an inward spiritual transformation. My heart is different. I'm drawing into His presence. I'm letting His word saturate my mind and my heart and taking root on the inside of me. And now suddenly from the inside out, He's making me more like Jesus. And here's the thing. If we were just talking about outward behavior modification, then I got to tell you something. With a little bit of practice, you can learn to behave a certain way as long as all the conditions are met. For example, this morning, you can adapt a behavior where church is concerned, a certain behavior. With a little bit of practice, you can learn how to dress for church. You can learn to carry your Bible to church. You can learn to sing the songs once you're in church. You can learn to participate and kind of plug into church. You can even learn how to say amen and hallelujah at the right time in church. But all the while, you could still have your heart and your spirit can be sloppy when you're outside of church. Because as long as your conditions change, or when your environment changes, or your surroundings change, then all of a sudden you will always revert back to what's on the inside of you. But a spirit of excellence knows how to show up no matter what the conditions are. A spirit of excellence knows how to shine even when you're in adverse conditions. And I'm just saying this morning, it doesn't matter where you came from today. I don't care where you've come from, whatever it is that you've experienced in your past, or even what you're facing out there in your future. Every person this weekend has access to a spirit of excellence if you will be willing to not conform to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. How many know what I'm talking about? You tracking with me this morning? Okay, Daniel chapter 6, beginning in verse number 4. It says it like this. You know, the king planned to set him over all the entire kingdom, and in verse 4 it says, "At this the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel." Now, Daniel's influence continues to grow. God continues to promote him and his influence. And it says these government local officials continue to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy, neither corrupt, neither negligent. Finally, these men said, "We will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it is something to do with the law of his God." These guys were like, "We don't like Daniel. We don't like what he stands for. We don't like his influence." We said last week that the moment you make the courageous decision to get off the broad road and get over onto the narrow road, there are going to be people in your life who aren't going to like it. They're going to criticize you. They're going to mock your commitment and your diligence. You just think you're just holier than everybody. You think you're better than we are. You show up at church every week. I see the way you dress up and walk out to your car every week. You just think you're better than us, don't you? But I'm telling you this morning, when you make the brave decision to stand, heaven will stand with you. Amen? And boy, I tell you, these guys came up with a plan. They came up with a plan. They played off the king's ego. And they went to the king and they said, "Hey, yo, king, we know that you're a man who needs respect and you haven't been getting it. So we have an idea. You should make a decree that for the next 30 days, anyone in the kingdom who does not worship you or pray to you, in fact, if they pray to any other god or any other human or worship any other god or human, let them be thrown into the lion's den." Let them be thrown into the den of lions. And the egomaniac king, he thought, you know, that's an idea you can really sink your teeth into. And he said, let's do it. And so he set the decree. Anyone who does not worship me or pray to me over the next 30 days will be thrown into the lion's den. Here's Daniel's response to this egomaniac. Verse number 10, "Now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day, he got down on his knees." Why do you open up windows if you don't want anybody to see what you're doing? And they saw what he was doing. And he opened up his windows, and 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before, let me tell you something, a person of excellence doesn't melt on the back burner. Just because things start to heat up, they don't give up. A person of excellence doesn't back off and begin to compromise just because things get a little tense. In verse number 11, it says, "Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree. And the king was bound by his own decree, and against his better wishes, because he liked Daniel, he had him thrown into the lion's den." Point number 2, excellence is what opens up the doors for greater opportunity. We're almost done. Excellence is what opens up the doors for greater opportunity. I don't know who I'm talking to today, but I'm just guessing this morning that in the midst of a world that is drifted, in the midst of a world that is filled with chaos and division, I guess I'm saying this morning that I'm just naive enough to think that you are going to lay hold of the confidence that what God has started on the inside of you, He's going to accomplish it all the way through. And that you and I are a part of something bigger. And we're a part of something greater. And like Daniel, who must have felt like what he was doing was so small against the backdrop of such a loud, violent, and dark culture, that what he was doing for God must have felt to him like such a small thing, like he was doing it in a small corner somewhere in the Babylonian Empire. I don't know, maybe it kind of for him started out like as a young Jewish boy in captivity making bricks from mud. And then someone notices him and the excellent spirit of how he's making mud and bricks. And then they promote him and bring him over to the yard of the palace. And he's out in that yard working, but he's not doing it like normal people do it, just doing enough to get by. He's shining. He's continuing that spirit of excellence. And then someone notices him, and they bring him into the palace, and he's now working in the kitchen, and someone sees what he's doing in the kitchen, and that spirit of excellence keeps finding its way and finding its way and finding its way and shining a light and being bright. And I got to tell you, I knew going into this that there are some people who don't like sermons like this. They don't want to hear about, sloppy living versus excellence. And I got to tell you something this morning. I haven't been the kind of person who makes sermons based on how I'm going to please people, and I'm not about to start now this morning. But I got to tell you something. As we look at the heroes of the Bible, they didn't start out in big influential places, but they all started out in these small corners, like David in a sheep field, like Peter in a fishing boat at night, like Daniel as a boy in exile. And what I'm saying is it all started in a place where people would not normally have noticed them. And I'm telling you this morning, oh church, I'm telling you this morning so that you will not underestimate that how your life and the excellence that you bring to the table can be used by God to open up doors of promotion, where God can bring you into places and spaces where your influence will continue to grow, and God will begin to use you in ways that will make a difference in the world around you. And I just want to say one more thing this morning, and I know as we look around, the world we're in right now there's this crazy stuff going on, and there's tension in our world, and America is divided like never before. It's just so divided. The division is we're seeing pictures that date all the way back to the 50s and the 60s. We're not going in the direction we should be going. We're digressing. The enemy's at work. And I'm telling you today, there are people who are Christian people who are so obsessed and worried about, what he's saying or what she's saying or what they're doing, and when's the next balloon of the economy? What's President Trump tweeting? What's What's Nancy Pelosi, rebutting? Can I just tell you something this morning? If you will spend less energy engaging in the conversation of division and engaging in the attitude of destruction, and spend more energy engaged in how can I let my light shine in a dark world, I'm telling you, God will promote you. The spirit of excellence, your blessing is tied to being exceptional. God will promote your influence, and your light will shine, and they will come to know. Let me tell you something. People, they're going to look at you and they're going to be like, you're not caught up in the strife and the debate. And it doesn't mean you don't stand up for what's right. Excellence is what opens the door for greater opportunity. You know the story. I got to close. Throws Daniel into the lion's den. And all night the king is up. He doesn't sleep. And first dawn, he runs to the cave. They roll the stone back. And he looks in there and he says, "Oh, Daniel, are you all right?" And I love Daniel's response. He says, Daniel answered, "May the king live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight. Nor have I done any wrong before you, your majesty." Verse 24, at the king's command, they brought Daniel. At the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den. I'm telling you, you don't have to spend your time and your energy trying to exact revenge on those who disagree with you. God knows how to find you in the sheep field. He knows how to find you on that fishing boat, and He knows where to find you in captivity if that's what it takes. Vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. And I'm telling you this morning, it says, watch this. Then the king, they pulled Daniel out, and the king, Darius, wrote to all the nations and the people of every language and all the earth. It says, "May you prosper greatly. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom, people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. For He is the living God." Just a couple days before, he was gloating over the fact that people were worshiping Him. For He is the living God, and He endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His domination will never end. God did not call you, hear me, church. God did not call you to curse the darkness. He called you to turn on a light. And He called you to be a person of influence. And you might feel like Daniel, like you're just in your little part of the world, not able to do anything of great significance. But God knows where to find you. You just keep being excellent. You just keep letting your light shine. You just keep being bright. And God will find you. And at the right time, He'll promote you. And those who tried to exact harm upon you, they'll not have to answer to you. They'll answer to your God. The world is about to see what God will do in and through and by and with and for the man or the woman who will be totally sold out to Christ.